So, thank you very much first of all for the invitation to the Metaphorum. I was like, first of all, clearly they have a chance to present my book, but secondly also to meet you and the exchange and engage and what you're thinking about the Bible system and the Bible system model. It's really a great opportunity for me. My name is Ulke. I'm associate partner with Pure Management Group. It's an Austrian-based consultancy, specialization in strategy, organizational topics, organizational diagnosis, reorganizations, cultural change. You have it, you know the field as well as I do. For us, the Bible system model is one of the key cornerstones in our thinking. And this is also due to our past. We are coming from Landig Management Center St. Gallen. In fact, we are the Vienna office of Landig Management Center St. Gallen and founded out from the center. And we are still very grateful for the heritage, the intellectual heritage from the center. Yeah. The other question that you have probably in mind is, and is probably more important, is how tall I am. I'm 2'4", so that's right in every way. And I'm not a morning person, so I don't know whether presenting now this time is really a viable solution for me. But I'll try my best. Regarding the title, Reloading Organization Viability contains two messages. The first one is regarding society. And in that regard, I like very much a quote by Peter Drucker: business enterprises are organs of society. And what I thought that captivated me, and it was sort of one of the prime motivators for me writing the 3 books, it was quite a long story, was that actually his thought that organizations they are managing the wealth and the resources of a society. And society is very much depending on the well-functioning of organizations in order to progress and to generate wealth and to create social cohesion. This was one of the insights Peter Drucker had in the wake of World War II, where he said managers and organizations have a societal responsibility. And why I'm saying this, I think the understanding in organizations of what constitutes viability in organizations is still, let's put it politely, it needs to be developed. There's a huge gap. I mean, every day when I'm meeting clients, and as you do, I'm discovering how much people, managers, lack a proper understanding of what constitutes viability. And it was one of the prime purposes for me to write this book. It starts with this thought and it ends with this thought at the end of the 3rd volume. What I would like to provide is for everyone, for every organization, for every manager, a map, an understanding of what constitutes viability. So this is the first aspect. But the second aspect concerns us. And I think the BSM is a great model, but I mean, you mentioned it already. We have new and new beyond as well. Okay. The new models out there, also the way of our thinking of how organizations work, you know, this agility and so forth has changed. And I think we also have to reload our understanding of how the BSM works and what it offers. I think we have to. It's a great model. At that time it was really, I think it's groundbreaking at that time when it was developed, but much has changed and we have to keep up with the change. So it's a 3 to 4 process actually, where we are. And that's my main part. But before I jump into what I wrote in my books, first of all, the first page belongs to Stefan Beer. I must say, yeah, you know him all. I don't need to say, I really want to pay tribute to him and his ideas and his insights. And he's the basis for whatever I wrote in this book. And the deepest and profoundest thanks to him, especially. And I liked your thought yesterday. Actually, I don't have an artifact. Stefan Beer is right in the midst of us, I think. He himself. Okay. So where are we regarding the BSM? Much has already been addressed. Current status. First of all, what I deplore is really we are not anymore involved in the academic discourse. The DSM, if you look at the curriculum at business schools, in academia, in A journals, it's not there. Publishing about the DSM, it's a waste of time for an academic career, and it's really deplorable. And I think that's even more important for us because business schools disseminate ideas. And they're a very important factor of bringing ideas across. They are educating future managers. And if we are not there, we really have, we struggle in disseminating the DSM. We have limited connectivity with other organizational theories. And another big problem is duplication. I mean, if it's a great theory, we have to ask ourselves, why hasn't it become more widespread? What are the reasons? I mean, and that's why I said we have to reload our understanding of the DSM in order to really make it applicable. And that is one of the objectives of mine. And there are some, what I perceive when I was talking to people, scholars, academics, practitioners, there's some valid points in terms of where we need to improve our understanding regarding the DSM. For instance, the systems function and the layout. Yeah, it's very important. This constitutes organizational viability. But if you look at the organizational practice, it's not sufficient just to enumerate the systems functions. I know a number of organizations that have all the systems functions in place. They have an audit, they have innovation processes and so forth, and still they are not functioning. So I think what we have to do as a next step in the development of the DSM to have a proper understanding of how these system functions need to function. What are their challenges? What are the key processes? How do they need to overcome it? And this was one of the main targets in the first volume that I wanted to address. Then more technical issues like missing temporal and process perspective. So there's sometimes a criticism, whether it's justified or not, that it's too static. Rationality is missing, so you have different centers of rationalities within an organization. How do you deal with that? That's not painted clearly in the DSM today. Terminology, you mentioned that, Angela, it's perceived as opaque today, especially today. If you just mention the term autopoiesis, what does it actually mean? And then we have some conceptual issues like variety. We are talking about variety, but there are different types of variety. The variety from the environment, what I called in my book the eigenvariety, so the competences, the resources that an organization brings along to resolve the variety. But it also generates internal complexity in variety that is not wanted. That's variety too. So what and I just these two examples show you that the different types of variety, we have to distinguish them a bit more conceptually. But nevertheless, it's a great model. I must say that. So we shouldn't get depressed. Whenever I teach the VSM, we teach it in seminars, for instance, it's a great model. People love it, it's intuitive, 20 minutes, they get it across, and after that they really start talking in these terms. And I had a seminar with one of our big public pension, not funds, sister organizations, who administer the public pensions. And very low level, I was really surprised. First I thought that's not probably the right level for this kinds of seminars, so very operational working people, but they loved it, talking about systems. I gave a system 3-star actually. The whole 2 days they changed the terminology. So there's really light on the horizon. It's working. It's a good model. And what he said, if I compare it to everything else we have in terms of management models, leadership, organizational models, it's far away. It's comprehensive, it's nuanced, it's balanced. That's what I like. It's extremely rich. And I must say, I used the VSM, before writing the books, I used the VSM myself for about 10 years. So before I started writing, I thought I knew everything about it. And I must say, it surprised me. It continuously surprised me how much there is in the VSM, what you can say with the help of the VSM. And I think our task is just to uncover it. Yeah? It's, and I would say, my last point, it clarifies and it saves a lot of time. I would say 80% of popular management literature, you don't need to read it anymore after you have read the right VSM. Let's be clear about it. It's a big time saver for management. And lastly, I think it's something that really managers and executives need to know. If you want to manage organizations, you need to know it's your control system. Yeah. Point. No discussion about that. Okay. Yeah. Target groups of, so I don't want to advertise my books, that's not the point, I just want to inform you. If you don't write it, it's fine. Don't say that to the publisher. Three target groups, organizational scholars, because I think we have to get back into the academic discourse. It's very key. Business schools, if you do sort of a systemic analysis, they have a key point, disseminating point of management ideas, just take HBR. From there the ideas are floating, the terms, the fashions. We have to get into them, we have to make it more understandable for them and link it to current organizational thinking. And what you notice throughout the 3 volumes, I always try to link the DSM to the mainstream organizational theories in which organizational scholars are thinking. So that was one of the aims to establish connectivity. Secondly, not clearly fast. And my thing is, I didn't want to retell the VSM and more, just make it more easy to understand. For me, it was also a journey in the unknown, yeah, and sort of an innovation lab. Yeah, and that was where I think, and sometimes I took very bold steps, and I hope you will understand it in that way. But it was, for me, I wanted to stimulate our thinking. You know, new perspectives, new ideas, ways. Probably they are not wrong. I just take them and say, okay, I have a different perspective. It's okay, but you know, get some new perspectives on it. And it's clearly not a final interpretation. It's an interpretation that I'd like to underline. You might have different understanding, and I think the VSM can be understood in different ways. It's open. So it's just one interpretation. And lastly, for practitioners of a new image, what I discovered is the role and importance of images. The image I have of something defines how I deal with an issue, and if I have the organizational chart structure as my predominant image, organizational image, it's clear that how I'm going to manage it in the organization. Yeah. And we need to change the image that practitioners have about the organization. That's why I like also the VSM, and that's also one of the focuses. Yeah, the rest is clear. So better comprehensive leadership model and so forth. Okay. Okay. 3 volumes, 875 pages. My wife is getting there. Who's going to read that? We'll see. But I put in many illustrations because one of the things is clear, the VSM, as it is very abstract, you need to illustrate it. So I spent a lot of time, even hiring a designer, to really make nice illustrations that have a certain appeal. Okay. So, book structure. Okay. Volume 1, so that's the introduction into the VSM. And for us, I think the important point is to uncover what I mentioned before. How are the systems function working? So what are the specific challenges and what are the key processes? That was one of the key targets. For instance, if you take system 3-star, we quickly say it's audit or improving. So what are the challenges? I mean, if you're in system 3-star, have you ever thought about it? Yeah.
Acceptance of the rest of the organization that this function is applied.
Yeah.
Then the danger that people build these nice facades when 3-star comes. Yeah. So wrong data is collected. Yeah. Data is collected but not used.
Yeah.
So 3 is not using the insights of 3-star.
Exactly. Yeah. So just your points are right. To what I mentioned is, first of all, to uncover the unknown. Yeah? You don't know what you don't know, what you should know. That's the key issue. How do you access something that's not known to you? How the operation actually works? And it builds up facade, and how do you penetrate that? That's a key point. And this is not just a matter of intellect or of having experience, having others seen. Even if you have a lot of, I mean, for me as a consultant, it's the same thing. I mean, I've seen many organizations, but how an organization really works, you only know if it opens up. And this brings me to one of the key answers. One of the seminar participants had in one of my last seminars. He said, "Well, actually, then the auditor he requires a person with a highly social skill." Yeah, and I've never thought about that. An auditor is something very rigid and very details, but it means someone with social skills can open up people, build up trust, and knows how to use the audit results. The second thing is System 3-star has to bring in another different perspective, because otherwise it couldn't calculate what to change. And then the question is, how do you as an organization cultivate a different perspective, otherness? And the third point is, do you permit it? Not only a threat to the lower levels, but it's also a threat to the upper levels. Yeah, because a different perspective means changing the way you're running the organization. So it's even a threat to 3 and 2. And that's what you experience as an auditor. You present your audit report and then it's shelved in the, in the archives. Yeah. So just to give you an idea in which way I try to proceed in this one, to get a better understanding what are the key challenges and what do you need as competence, as variety to cope with that. That's what I'm... Another aspect that I tried to implement is, and to bring it a bit closer to current thinking, is the ecosystemic approach. I think that you can do that very nicely. If you look at System 1 and its interaction of the environment, basically that's an ecosystemic approach. And one of the key messages for me regarding the VSM, by the VSM is you have to build the organization in a way to establish that you can build up ecosystems. The basis of an organization are ecosystems. And that's something brings us much closer to current thinking. For instance, I'm in the steering committee for the Metaphorum. I don't know whether you know that. It's a big management congress every year taking place in Vienna. And this year we have, our topic is ecosystems. With the VSM we are right there. That's the organizational model for this approach. Yeah? It shows us. Yeah? Another thing, transducers. I don't know, it's a minor detail, normally you read over it. But then I figured out, actually, you have one information channel and you have 2 transducers. What does this tell us? Well, it tells us that organizations are not just information systems, as we normally conceive them, but far more translation systems. Organizations consist of different worlds, you just take the corporate functions. Every corporate functions, every unit has its own worldview, its own language. And the key task and the key challenge of organizations is to translate between these different worldviews. And that's something that you can read out of the DSM. Yeah, information is important, but much more important are your translation capabilities. You have to build them up. So these are just some highlights of what I...
Can you talk about your new understanding of hierarchy?
Hierarchy. Well, there's new models that you see out there is we need to abolish hierarchy and and flat hierarchy and so. I mean, I understand the intention well taken. Hierarchy in negative sense, but for me, I think these approaches mix two aspects. One is sort of what Stefan Beer called a logical problem. And the other one is the style, how you exercise it, how you live hierarchy. If you take the VSM, Stefan Beers clearly says you have a horizontal dimension and hierarchy is the vertical dimension. It's a different aspect. And it's a logical problem and you can't evade it. And when I try to, and that's one thing, and if you look at the VSM, for me it's that the system 1 is the system 1 and the system 5 is the System 5 is no coincidence, meaning the numbering logic. But it has a profound meaning that actually the organization really, it starts with system 1 and it builds up with system 5. Meaning that system 1 is the core of the organization and everything else is more or less supporting the systems 1. Yeah? And that was then one of my thoughts that, well, if I apply that to the issue of hierarchy, I come to a completely different understanding. And I can turn around the classic organizational chart, which is top-down, and if I turn it by 90 degrees, I can say actually the hierarchy in the BSM understanding is something that adds depth, maneuverability, sorry, it's too early, to an organization. Yeah? Meaning, you know, the operational units, they have to fight every day with the customers. Yeah? And what is going on in the future, how to change in long term, how to create synergies, they don't have time. And that's the function of a hierarchy of the higher levels. They deliberate lower levels of these kind of problems and take care of that. They add depth and maneuverability to the organization. Like in the middle there, you have the front men fighting the soldiers, and behind that you have big logistics, yeah, that helps them to cope with what's going on. And in that way, I tried to present the hierarchy, yeah, as a switch, you know, from top versus top down, top versus down, to closeness and depth. So hierarchy is a support function. As support mechanisms to add variety to the organization. Yeah. And that's what I wanted to convey in my first volume. So which preserves on the one hand that we need a hierarchy, but it adds also a positive value to hierarchy, that we say hierarchy is a good thing. The only thing is, and this is the social dimension, is how it's exercised. That's the key problem. How do I exercise hierarchy? What kind of style do I use? And who do I include in the metasystemic level? And that's what another advantage, in my view, the BSM presents. It purposely, it doesn't talk about positions and people. It leaves it open. Who is system 5, 4, and 3? Yeah? And I think that's ingenious, yeah? Because it's then up to because it shows organizations that actually you have then to define who needs to be in system 3. You need a system 3, but who it is, it's not just one single manager. You have to think, how do I have to enrich the system 3 with which kind of people to make it work to add the necessary eigenvariety. So,
very brief question. I noticed on this topic that Stafford uses the word heterarchy. And I was just wondering if you've come across that.
Yeah, thank you. But just looking at time, we can. Yeah, I'm coming across, and it's an issue that talk about in System 5 exactly the balance between heterarchy and hierarchy.
Yeah,
which is
language.
Yeah, which is a key issue, and I say, and I think that's. I always like to take a balanced approach. It's neither hierarchy nor heterarchy alone. The key issue in organizations and organizational viability to get the balance between both and manage transition protocols that allow you to switch from the hierarchical to the hierarchical mode and back forwards. And that's what you can observe in organizations. But we can talk about it later. I have to rush. Okay, so yeah, volume 2, just quickly, diagnosing and governing organizations. So that's about the diagnosis. One is what are the dysfunctionalities? I try to put, make more, increase what we have already from previous literature, put some more structure in it, and the second, and specifically, what was important for me, I think that's a key, that's really a new perspective for organizational scholars, this issue of variety processing. For me, in organizational design questions, one of the key values is variety processing. Looking at the varieties that certain units have to process, and this gives me then a clue of how to design the organization. And that's where I want to draw the attention to variety processing. Interesting side aspect, you can also apply the BSM to the life cycle. model. So the nice thing, the lifecycle model is applied in strategy. The VSM gives you the organizational part. Yeah? Which is, I think, quite useful. We are using now the VSM in strategy processes. At the end, if you define a strategy, we have to test it whether it's organizational viable. Then we're using the VSM. Yeah, part 2 is about governance. So governance in a large sense, how do you have to steer, like a car? What are the principles? And this relates to the principle of equating the horizontal varieties in the systems 1 and the law of requisite vertical eigenvariety. I'm dealing with that in length. And then finally, I think that a very nice part is what I discovered. It's my interpretation. You can see the VSM as a system of polarities that are observing each other. If you look at the systems functions, you have certain polarities. The clear one is 1 to 3 different perspectives. You have 3 star to 2. You have 3 to 4. You have the environment, the organization. And that's led me to the interesting insight that actually an organization, it comes alive if it upkeeps these polarities that are mutually observing. And the problem of every organization is that it's reducing complex. It needs to reduce. And to counterbalance this reduction, it needs to uphold these polarities, these different opposing perspectives to observe what what it forgot to consider, what it cancelled out.
You talk about the yin and the yang, the complementary.
You could use it like you could see that as well like that. Yeah, exactly. So organization as a system of mutually observing polarities, which explains, for instance, why you have to separate 3 star and 3. It's in an organization, what you actually do. Okay. So yeah, and another thing is what I want to introduce to counterfeit the argument that the VSM is too static. To view it as a dynamic system. You know, you have all these lines between the systems function. In volume 2, I'm presenting it as what the dynamics behind it. Every relation is in fact an equilibrium, yeah, that needs to be found. Yeah, volume 3, design changing organization. That's a volume that will come out now. I estimate end of November, beginning of December. Is about really then building the bridge to the organizational chart. So starting with the classic corporate functions. How do I understand them in the VSM? How do I find them? How do I understand them? Secondly, how does the VSM relate to the organizational chart structure? And then in part 2, I'm describing the process of how to design organizational chart structures. So basically, it's a bottom-up process. So first of all, clearly you have to define a strategy, but then you build it up from the ground, from sort of basic systems 1 to the top level, and show also how to transfer it into an organizational chart. And finally, in part 3, I'm talking about, again, a bit about the process, the diagnosis process, and first and foremost about organizational change, because I think the VSM also gives us some clue about the design of change processes. There's some important messages entailed on how to change organizations. And it's not a change model in itself, but I think there are some important lessons to learn. Okay.
Thank you very much.
I will take topic.
I'm going to take a few questions before going down here.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Just thank you very much. The question that comes to me is we rely very much on static field.
Yeah.
Do you have any further research that you have done around inputs, other people's work, so that we can build on the shoulders of many people rather than just one?
I use a very Rios method.
Is this blinking or what?
Yeah, almost.
Oh, okay.
Survive the next page.
So you
This community has to build on it. It is not only there are many people, who have been publishing and doing well.
That's right. That's right.
I suspect everything I heard is something that I connect to the region.
That's very much linked to the
There's
region.
not anything that implies integration, that implies thinking based on others' words.
Yeah. No, I made a deliberate choice because I discussed it. I really wanted to do an interpretation of Stefan Thiel's work. Very close to it.
But this is the problem. Now that you have to do it based on what other people have been working in.
Yeah, but I think.
You cannot do it strictly based on statistics.
Yeah, but no, you're right, but I don't think that I miss key aspects.
I think you do, as far as I can tell.
Okay.
So that is
Well, yeah, then it's a
simple
choice.
observation.
Yeah, sure. Then you're right.
I just wanted to make another comment, and is that many people in this room have been teaching the BSM in different countries and have been publishing BSM in different journals. I'm much more optimistic about the importance of the BSM because even if it's isolated places, I have the impression that the interest in the BSM is just rising, it's not disappearing. And you can see that in the number of BSM papers in the literature, and compared with other systems approaches, BSM is getting always further. So I think that the context is there. Even for people like me, that I was an academic now, happily retired, I managed to publish. I managed to publish BSM, and there is a lot of interest in BSM publications, more and more and more. So just to contrast, I think that we need to be more optimistic.